everybody. Welcome to Resistance Live. It's the 2nd of July, 2025, and it's another crappy day in America. Gallows humor gets me through every time. All right, so we have to talk today about what happened yesterday in Florida. There was a tour of the new camp that was underway while we were on the air, which was at exactly the same time that the MAGA murder budget bill was passing the Senate. That is not a done deal yet, so we have to talk about that also because there's a lot of work to be done today and some very interesting news coming out about what's happening with the required passage of the new bill in the House. So stay tuned for that. We've also had a verdict in the Diddy trial this morning. Lot to cover there. CBS is settled with President Trump. Lots to cover there. And then we've got all sorts of other things to talk about that are, just as important, but a little scattered around the edges. So here we are. Today for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing a black top with a black blazer over top. My hair is pulled back. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman. I am in my office in front of my bookshelf and my yellow utility cart, as always, and coming to you from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Okay, so yesterday while we were on the air, Trump and Noem and Ron DeSantis were touring a brand new concentration camp in the Florida Everglades. So I have to say something about this, and this is the reason why it felt really important to come on here and talk about this kind of immediately. I want everybody to understand that the language that the federal government is using and the name that they have given to this concentration camp is a part of their own propaganda, okay? They are referring to it, as I think everybody has heard now, as Alligator Alcatraz, okay? Alcatraz is a now shut down prison that was notorious for brutality and deplorable conditions. But what they're seeking to do by using that language is to make this seem like it's just an ordinary prison for people who have committed crimes, when the reality is that the people who are going to be detained there are moms, bakers, restaurant workers, field hands, people who are day laborers from the local Home Depot parking lot, the vast majority of whom have never been accused of a crime. So the language that they're using is propagandist, and on top of it, they're making it a brand. So I think most folks have seen this already, but they're already selling merch. Concentration camp merch. Like literally, can you imagine them selling baseball caps for Auschwitz? Because that's literally the kind of thing that's happening here. Baseball camps for Japanese internment camps during World War II, right? Merch for slave labor concentration camps in the South in the 1800s. That's the essential equivalent of what they're doing here when they are selling merch for this particular concentration camp. So the language of this is really important. And I'm going to say one other thing. I've heard some folks on the progressive side of things referring to it as Alligator Auschwitz. I just have to point something out. While I understand that history is teaching us an awful lot about where we are, right? And what happened in the 30s in Germany and how that history can inform where we find ourselves right now. I also want to point out that this thing of de-Americanizing brutality takes away from the fact that, the U.S. has always done this. Can we just talk about this for a second, right? Slave labor camps were foundational to the economic prosperity of America right after it was founded, right? Southern plantations were slave labor camps, okay? The mission system in California was a slave labor set of camps for indigenous people and Chinese folks, right? We interned Japanese Americans during World War II in concentration camps, right? So I think it's very important for us to remember that what is happening in this country is a part of our history, right? It's not just something that has been exported from Nazi Germany. And in fact, for those of you who have read Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, which I strongly recommend that you read if you have not, you know one very critical fact, which is that the Nazis studied the way that Black folks were treated in the U.S. American South when they designed their anti-Semitic state policies against the Jews. That, my friends, is truth. The Nazis learned it from us. So I want people to be very, very careful about the language that they're using right now because it matters. We don't need some cutesy title for a concentration camp, and we don't need something that refers to something outside the United States in order to amplify the gravity of what's going on. You can just call it a concentration camp. It's an American concentration camp. We've done this before. And the fact that people are buying into the kind of branded sloganeering about this camp, which, by the way, can we just point out that what happened yesterday was that members of the current regime were laughing as they were walking through a concentration camp that looks remarkably like Dachau in the 30s. They were laughing. They were cracking jokes. Right-wing bro podcasters who were a part of that tour were posting photographs of themselves in the merch on social media yesterday. We need to get really serious about what this is and also not simultaneously diminish it. So we don't need any, like, I'm going to second what Imani Gandhi said this morning, who happens to be a Jewish Black American and also a lawyer. We don't need cutesy names for concentration camps. We can just call them concentration camps, right? They're American concentration camps. We have done this before. So, one of the things that I think is really key to understanding where we're at is that, like, we got here all on our own. And part of the analysis of how we've gotten here has to be grounded in American history. This is one reason, by the way, why they don't want public schools at the moment in many locations in this country teaching the truth of Black American history. Because when you learn the truth of it, you understand that what's happening now has a context, that it actually ties all the way back to the foundational moments of this nation in the history of indigenous genocide, which, by the way, shoved the hundreds of thousands of Native Americans who were left into reservations, which is its own form of ethnic cleansing and segregation, right? We know the history of this nation is founded in the enslavement of African people and indigenous genocide, right? And when you look at that history, you understand that it's like a straight line to what's happening in the Everglades today, right? History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. So really critical right now to make sure that we are calling them concentration camps. And they're not internment camps. This is the other thing that I just want to say here. Stop sanitizing the language, okay? They're not detention camps. They're concentration camps. That's what they are. They are concentration camps in the traditional definition of this. I'll just tell you guys, back in 2019, when I was doing all that mobilization against family separation during Trump 1.0, people lost their minds when we, along with AOC and others who were organizing those mobilizations, described what was happening at the southern border in places like McAllen, Texas, and El Paso and elsewhere as concentration camps. That is literally what they are. They meet the definition. So it's really critical at this point that we don't sanitize the language and we don't use their propaganda, because I'm going to remind you of one other thing about disinformation from the right wing. They count on us, on people on our side of the fence, to propagate their falsehoods. Even if we're repeating them and saying, well, that sucks, we're still amplifying their terminology, and that normalizes it. What they're trying to do right now is normalize the idea that brown and Black people are so unworthy of dignity and human rights and due process that it's okay to put them in a place in a hurricane zone, intense, surrounded by alligators, where they might be mauled or brutalized or eaten if they try to escape. That's what they're trying to normalize. And I'm going to remind you of one other thing here, right? Dehumanization has a path. Once you start dehumanizing the people who are in incarceration, and there's a whole other American history we could talk about here on this, right? Because the mass incarceration of Black and brown Americans in this country is also a precursor to this. One of the things that we have to think about here is that dehumanization paves the way for other worse forms of dehumanization. For random murderous violence, for lynchings, right? For mass extermination. That's what they're paving the way for with the language that they're using. If it's a cutesy joke, then it's not really all that serious. And that's one of the reasons why what happened yesterday, where they're all smiles, walking around, cracking jokes in a place where literally they are setting people up for death one way or another, should be one of those kind of things that makes your skin crawl every single time that you think about it. And I'm also just going to say one other thing, because I think it's worth repeating. I said this morning, much like during Trump 1.0, I'm not really sleeping very much these days. I'm also in this place where I keep thinking about future Nuremberg style trials. What would it look like to have trials of the people who are currently playing this out, right? The photographs from yesterday, the photographs of them walking through in their MAGA merch, laughing and cracking jokes in a place where people are going to be incarcerated in the path of a hurricane in tremendously despicable conditions, right? Put in bunk beds, is something that, from the lens through which we are looking at American history, we should find evidence that hopefully in a future version of this country or whatever comes after it will be exhibits at those people's trials. That's how bad it is. So I really don't want anyone to kind of like fall prey to the way in which they are trying to spin this. It's not funny, right? It's in fact a kind of banality of evil in its own way that is truly revolting, all right? So call it what it is. Like, call it what it is. And, you know, I'm going to remind you of something else because it just feels really important to say this. People are dying right now at the hands of ICE. There was a man, a grandfather, who had been in the United States for 40 plus years, who was picked up in Florida, who died in ICE custody last week, had never committed a crime, never been like accused of committing a crime, right? Actually, I may be wrong about that. I think he might have had like a weed arrest 40 years ago, okay? But literally no pending criminal charges, nothing that would warrant his arrest, had raised a family, gone to work, done everything right, right? Just in the same way that, like, you know, there are so many cases of like people being denied medical care in custody, people's like babies being born stillborn when they were having problems and couldn't get prenatal care. This kind of stuff is happening all the time. ICE is already killing people. So let's not play into the joke, right? We don't need a cutesy name for a fucking concentration camp. Pardon my French, but like, I'm really mad about this. It's bullshit. It's bullshit. We owe it to the dignity of the people who are being kidnapped off the street, stolen from their families, taken away from their legitimate employment, people who are asylum seekers, who have fled gang rape and mass violence and threats of murder and LGBTQ persecution. We owe them the truth of what this country is doing to them. Full stop. So, you know, speak it out loud to everyone you know, and don't fall prey to the games. Also, of course, you can call your reps and your senators about this. And, you know, I said it yesterday, I'm going to say it again. Now that the murder budget has passed the Senate, if it in fact passes the House, ICE will have enough of a budget to put a concentration camp in every town in America. I'm not joking. They will have a larger budget and a larger number of agents. They'll have a larger number of agents in the FBI, by the way, a larger budget than all but 2 of the militaries on Earth. I'm not making that up either. Okay. You have to be prepared and organized right now for what you're going to do when a concentration camp starts being built in your town. How are you going to resist that? There are stories right now, by the way, that I want people to be aware of, because I think we're not getting enough right now in this moment of the way in which resistance is playing out community by community and town by town. There's a situation right now where an Iranian immigrant who is here on legal status has been targeted by ICE in his apartment complex. And all of his neighbors, I think this is in Massachusetts, if I'm remembering correctly, all of his neighbors have taken shifts inside that apartment building to make sure that ICE can't get in to take him. Like, they're standing watch at the front door, and they have been doing it for a week. So again, this kind of resistance is really critical. Okay, I'm going to say one other thing here, because I know everybody's been really wound up about this Ice Block app that has come out. I still have very significant questions about that app. And I know that it's a single guy, and I know that he's not putting it on Google Android because that requires the maintenance of user data. Okay, I know it's only on an iPhone, but I have to tell you guys, like, you need to be very cautious right now about your data and where you are engaging online about this kind of stuff. All right. I don't know enough. I'm just going to be really honest yet at this point about how the Ice Block app intends to respond to a federal subpoena for data if and when that comes. And I'm going to tell you something else. I mentioned this yesterday on Blue Sky, and this morning, Trump threatened to sue CNN for doing a story about the Ice Block app and said that he was going to have Pam Bondi look into prosecution of the people who were involved in building it. So again, you've got to be really cautious. Like, is it encrypted? Are you using it with a VPN? Meaning like a virtual private network where like your location, your IP address isn't tracked directly to you? Is your data security secure enough that you're not worried? And what about theirs, right? Do we know for certain that like there's no means by which the data that's being collected by them, which could include IP addresses, is something that isn't going to be turned over to the federal government? Think very carefully about this, because, you know, there's a lot that has been built in resistance-based movements inside the United States about data security and the protocols that need to be followed. And it's really critical at this point for people to be thoughtful about this stuff, like really thoughtful, okay? And again, I will point out that the Progressive Safety Alliance has information on digital security for movement builders that everybody should be aware of and should be following, okay? Really important in this era, really important. Because I got one other thing I got to tell you, and we talked about this yesterday. You know, the DOJ now has instructions to denaturalize U.S. citizens if they don't like what they're doing, basically. If they have some reason to think they're affiliated with some form of like gang violence, right? Which could allegedly be anybody, depending on how they decide to like define that, okay? If you are working on protest-based movements, you should be incredibly rigorous about your digital security. So, you know, one of the things that I think is really, really key right now is that we don't just leap on the latest thing that looks like it might be headed in the right direction. We need information, transparency, and data, okay? And you can do resistance-based efforts with your neighbors, you know, using a phone tree, for God's sake, right? I don't think any of the people who are defending their Iranian neighbor are busy doing it on Ice Block app. They're probably like talking to each other through their apartment doors, right? This is one reason, by the way, why I think it's really important that you are deeply invested and ingrained in community building where you live, right? Because if you know your neighbor and you know the person across the street and you know the other person down the street who might be in trouble or might be vulnerable in some way, you've got that person's phone number. You can go knock on their door, right? You can like let them know if you hear about something that you think could impact them. So again, like really critical to be thoughtful about this stuff in this era. Okay. We have to talk about what's going on with the MAGA murder budget because the story is not over yet. Okay. So now that it has passed the Senate, as it did yesterday when we were on the air, it has to go back to the House and be voted on again in its reconciled form. This morning, there's breaking news that there is a defection from the GOP. This is really significant, where 20 House members of the GOP are saying that they're not going to vote for this bill. Okay, we only need 4 Republicans for this bill to go down in flames. Okay, now some of these people are like Freedom Caucus people, and they don't think it goes far enough. But nonetheless, there's room here to maneuver so that this budget does not actually become reality. So on my Blue Sky feed this morning, and I'll actually see if I can just drop the link here into the chat for all of you. There is a link courtesy of Rebecca Solnit, who you all know I love, which is a script and a document of members of the House of Representatives who should be targeted today. Here's the Google link. I've just dropped it into the chat for all of you. Uh-oh, that didn't fly. Okay, you're going to have to copy it from the two chunks of the chat in order to make it line up right. But I'm also just going to link here to my Blue Sky post that has the whole thing in case you guys need it, because it has a script and it has people who should be targeted. Okay, where is it? I need to actually link this to you guys so you can all use it. Okay, here we go. Copy link to post. So I'm going to drop this right now into the chat. This is the link to the post on Blue Sky that has that information. It has scripts. It has information that you can use. And for some reason now it's not letting me load it. Hopefully this will load. There we go. Okay. This has information that you can use for your calls today. Now, I want to remind you all of something. You should be calling no matter what, right? Even like my rep is LaMonica McIver. I'm calling her today, right? I know she's going to vote down the bill. She's being prosecuted by Trump's DOJ, for Christ's sake, right? I'm not worried about her vote, but I also want her to know how much I support her efforts, right? You should be calling your reps to do the same. If you know that they're Democrats, tell them you're behind them. Tell them that we need to defeat the bill. Tell them to keep going. And you should also be calling Republicans and giving them a piece of your mind. If you happen to have a MAGA rep, make your phone calls because they need to hear from us. And they need to hear from us like the truth of our stories, of what's going to happen in our neighborhoods and to our communities and to our friends and to our family members and to us if this budget passes, okay? Somebody asked me this morning on the Patreon feed. Reminder, you can ask me questions over there if you become a subscriber for as little as $5 a month. Somebody asked me this morning, like when all of this is going to take effect and what the concerns are about that. Well, it takes effect essentially immediately unless the provisions provide otherwise, as soon as it's signed into law by the president. It has to pass the House first, then it lands on Trump's desk. He's got some rah-rah narcissistic bullshit going on where he wants it signed on the 4th of July. Because, of course, like what screams freedom, like dropping 16 million people off their health insurance and empowering ICE as the nation's largest secret police force? I mean, that sure sounds like land of the free to me. We have to really be insistent on making these calls. And I will just tell you one other thing here that is really significant. Okay. You should be polite when you call. Okay. Those are interns answering the phone. Most of them are college students or recent college grads. They do have to log those calls. Don't scream at them, but you can tell your stories and it's okay to be emotional. And I will tell you right now, like the people who are in our program community for the Ripple Effect Institute, the folks that I work with day in, day out, who are major progressive leaders who are doing this work, they're making their phone calls and they are telling the emotional basis of what's going to happen to them and the people they love if this budget becomes law. And I will tell you that in some instances, the interns are in tears by the time they're done. Okay. That is a much more effective way to levy your voice for change than screaming down the phone line at a 19-year-old intern. So tell the stories that matter. Okay. Tell the stories of how this is going to impact you. Tell the people who answer the phone that you want a better world for them than what those folks are giving to us. That you want them to have a future where they know they're going to be cared for and where their parents are going to have medical care and where their disabled family members and friends don't have to worry about being out on the street or choosing between paying rent and getting medicine. Like, tell the stories because the storytelling is the most effective means of reaching people in the gut and in the heart. Okay. Go to that place. All right. Okay. This morning, Paramount CBS, Paramount's the parent company, settled a lawsuit by Donald Trump over the 60 Minutes interview of Kamala Harris back in advance of the 2024 election. This is a lawsuit, and I said this at the time that it was filed. This is a lawsuit that has absolutely no merit whatsoever. They settled it for $16 million. It is a bribe. We need to actually see it for what it is. It is a bribe. Paramount is trying to accomplish a merger right now that needs U.S. government approval. This is a bribe. And so one of the things that we have to remember in this era is that the corruption runs thick, right? Donald Trump claimed in that lawsuit that he had suffered extreme emotional distress. I mean, I don't even know what that looks like when you have dementia and you're a malignant narcissist, but claimed that he had suffered extreme emotional distress as a result of the way 60 Minutes had edited the Kamala Harris interview. I will remind you all that to prove extreme emotional distress in a court of law, you have to subject yourself to a psychiatric evaluation by an expert in the area in which you are claiming distress. And that expert has to be certified by the court. Donald Trump was never going to do that. But Paramount CBS decided to settle this case anyway. Why? Because they're afraid that their business aims are going to be adversely impacted if they do not pay off the president. It's exactly what it is. So again, you have to be able to, make it very clear to the people that you're talking about that this is exactly what it looks like. Okay. CBS didn't do anything wrong. There's several producers at 60 Minutes, including the guy who'd been the head of it for decades. They quit over this because they knew that it was an impact to their journalistic integrity and they knew that they had done nothing wrong. And yet, Paramount caved. A really disgusting day, honestly, for the First Amendment, for freedom of the press. And also, I just have to point out, capitulation is never a good sign, because as soon as he does that, like he gets that, he will do it again to someone else, or he will demand more, as we saw with Columbia University, right? We've seen the resignation of the president of UVA this week, in part because he's been able to leverage his threats to accomplish other things at other universities. So this has a domino effect, when the reality is that if you stand up to a bully, that creates a wall, and it actually prevents him from coming after you in the future. He may get mad, he may get loud and blustery, but he's not going to have a leg to stand on. And sure, they'll threaten to deny funding, and that also can go into a court of law and get an injunction, because it's not a universal injunction. It's a specific injunction with regard to a particular educational institution or a particular company. So this is a cave, right? And on top of it, it feeds the propaganda machine. So we have to continue telling the truth. Like, again, we've got to continue telling the truth. Okay. I had a lot of questions on the Patreon feed this morning about class actions. So many of you know that I spent like the first 7 years that I was a lawyer doing class action work, albeit in the realm of like antitrust and securities fraud and human rights litigation. And I did, some class action work throughout my entire career, but the vast bulk of it was done in the first 7 years I was practicing. And I worked at a law firm in Washington, D.C. that did a lot of forward-facing, victim-based class action work. And then I did some defensive class action work when I got onto Wall Street. Long story. Okay. The way class actions work in this country is not that you can't randomly come together and say, I want to sue the entire right-wing media for damaging American democracy. Okay. First of all, there's no cause of action under law that would allow you to do that. Okay. Just in the same way that there's no cause of action that's going to allow you to sue a whole bunch of GOP senators for voting in favor of this bill. They have a form of immunity for acting within the scope of their duties. Okay. In the same way, the American public can't randomly sue Donald Trump for emotional distress. Okay. So I just want to I'm going to put on my former law professor hat for one moment and just explain this again, because I really want people to hear this. It's really critical to understand how it works. Class actions are governed by Rule 23 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. And in order to make out a cause of action for damages, which is Rule 23B3, you have to do two things. You have to prove, you actually have to do 5 things, but I'm going to give you the 2 that matter the most. You have to prove that there is a commonality in the class between common questions of law and fact. Okay, so what that means is that everybody's got to have the same legal claims, everybody's got to have suffered the same kind of damage, and the facts have to be the same. Okay, every single person in America would not argue that they have suffered damage at the hands of the right-wing media. Lots of people love Fox News, right? Lots of people don't want to get their information from anywhere except Fox News or, like News Nation or one of those other outlets. Okay, InfoWars. But the other thing to keep in mind here is that the question would be what are the individual facts of how people have been damaged? They have to be common, okay? They have to be common to the entire class. The second prong of this that is extremely significant is what's called the predominance requirement. And that requires the common questions of law and fact to predominate over any issues that create difference, all right? So again, you try to put a class together of all of America, you're going to have a lot of difference in that class. You're going to have people who are like, hooray for Donald Trump, right? I'm so glad he's doing all of this. That person's never going to assert that they've been damaged. So there's no way that the predominance requirement could be met. All right. Now, let me give you a much tighter example of this so you understand how it works, because these requirements are very specific. All right. They're very specific. Let's just say hypothetically, here's a great example. This one actually was a case that my firm was involved in. Okay. Let's just say hypothetically that you are a purchaser of a certain kind of stucco siding. Okay. And you buy that stucco siding, and the stucco siding turns out to not be waterproof. And as a result, you've got wood rot in your house from when it rains, right? And that wood rot may be more or less depending on the climate where you live, but nonetheless, you have bought the same stucco and you have the same kind of damage, okay? Class certification motion is filed on behalf of a bunch of purchasers, right? You have these named plaintiffs, all of whom have bought the same product, suffered the same injury, and their common questions of law and fact predominate over their individual issues. Common questions being they bought the product, they've suffered the same damage, and they've got common facts, right? All against the same manufacturer. Easy class certification. Super easy. because the only difference that they're going to have to show is like the volume of damage, right? But the class can be certified as people who purchased its brand of stucco, suffered water damage, and had damage to their homes. Easy peasy. There is no way to do it on behalf of the entire American public or to sue a multitude of different news organizations at the same time or anything along those lines. And I think there's kind of like this fantasy that somehow the class action mechanism could provide some form of relief. It doesn't work like that. You know, I'm sorry. I want people to be really clear on this because I get this question like once a quarter, at least, sometimes once a month. There's no way to structure a class action for the kind of relief that people are seeking. And this is your fair reminder that the kind of relief from what we're suffering from requires all of us to get involved, sometimes in the streets, sometimes behind the scenes, but like, don't neglect your own power or rely on the courts to fix it at this point, because we've all seen where this is going. Plus, even if you win a class certification, that decision gets to go up on appeal. So I want everybody to be really clear on this because the questions keep coming on this and there's just no way to do it on the kind of scale that some of you wish there was. All right, we have to talk about the Diddy verdict. This morning, Sean Diddy Combs was found not guilty of RICO and of sex trafficking, 2 counts of sex trafficking, but was convicted of transportation in pursuit of prostitution. This is a devastating verdict for his victims. 2 of his victims, Cassie and someone who went by the anonymous name Jane, testified in court of the extreme violence that they suffered at his hands, the fact that his company money was used to transport them for sex trafficking purposes, which would have, by the way, made up the RICO count. And the way in which this verdict went was not honestly what anybody expected. Yesterday afternoon, we had a note from the jury that they reached a verdict on 4 out of 5 counts. We did not know what the verdict was, but we knew they were hung on the RICO count. This morning, they came back and they reached a verdict on the RICO count. And all that I can say about it is that my suspicion is the confusion was about the fact that RICO requires at least 2 predicate acts to find a violation of RICO, in addition to a determination that the enterprise involved, namely Diddy's businesses, constitutes a RICO enterprise in furtherance of a series of crimes. The 2 guilty counts for transportation in pursuit of prostitution would arguably be the predicate acts for RICO, but there were clearly people who didn't want to find in favor of RICO, and it's also clear that this jury wanted to go home before the 4th of July. So we don't know yet. This is what everybody's waiting on now, is that Diddy's lawyers asked for him to be released immediately on bail pending sentencing. Now, there's a maximum sentence for each of the 2 counts of transportation for purposes of prostitution of 10 years. So he could be facing 20 years in jail. And the U.S. attorney in charge of the case has indicated that they're going to be asking for a substantial sentence, which I think is going to be like the max on the basis of the allegations here. Because I'm just going to mention one other thing. There's a whole other series of crimes over which the Southern District of New York did not have jurisdiction that nonetheless testimony was admitted with regard to in this case, like the fact that he firebombed Kid Cudie's car when he found out that Kid Cudie was having a relationship with Cassie, that he threatened to kill people, like to murder people, as a result of the ways that they were acting around his particular vein of compliance. The way in which all of this has gone down, and I agree with the commentators this morning who are saying the system is functioning as intended. What we really have to be careful about now is remembering that the system was not designed to benefit survivors, right? And this verdict is an indication of the way in which the system is failing survivors, right? We need like new understanding, new education, new laws to benefit people who, in the sway of celebrity or power, are used in this way. Because I think my suspicion, we haven't heard from the jury yet, at least we hadn't by the time I went on the air, is that there seems to be an indication that his celebrity may have played a factor in the not guilty verdict. Also, the fact that both Cassie and Jane admitted that they had participated in recruiting people into prostitution for these hotel-based rape parties, because it allowed them to have some means of control over what was happening to them. So they may have seen the victims here as complicit when in fact they weren't, right? They were just trying to survive. Plus, one of the things that's so horrifying about this is we have videotape of Diddy beating Cassie in the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles when she tried to escape one of these rape parties. So trafficking includes forced compliance, right? And I don't really understand, frankly, in the means by which this jury saw all of this evidence, they could have reached this conclusion, but they did. And there's going to be a lot of analysis about why. The one thing that I will say here is that nobody should ever be knocking a rape victim or a trafficking victim for why they didn't come forward. Because this case is an example of what happens when they do. And we need a better system altogether for the sake of the people who have been through things like this. If he is released today, it will be shocking. I personally will tell you that I would be terrified if I had been someone who testified against him. What he is asking for is to be flown to his exclusive enclave in Florida where he will stay, but he will have travel potential to Los Angeles and New York. It would be extremely bad. And I don't know how the judge is going to come out on it, frankly. The judge asked for letters to be returned to the court by 1 p.m. And then there's going to be an additional hearing on whether or not he's going to be released. Really, really bad. Just really, really bad. Not a good day. And I have to say one other thing. The system is much harder on Black women who come forward than it is on white women. It is much harder generally on people who are already marginalized, who are victims of sexual violence. We have to see this verdict in that context also. Okay. Last question that was posed to me today was like managing what's happening right now and the enormous fallout from it. And, you know, we spent a lot of time over the last couple of weeks here talking about issues related to mental health. I understand entirely why people are feeling really broken by where we are after the passage of the murder budget yesterday in the Senate, and why we all are really concerned and despairing. I'm with you on this. All right. One thing that I will tell you is that I personally find great solace in the groups of people who are really doing incredible work right now to try to keep people alive and to keep communities organized and to fight back. And even yesterday, after the murder budget passed, we had a meeting for our participants inside the Ripple Effect Institute that truly lifted my spirits, right? Because everybody in there is not giving up, right? And by the way, I'll just mention this, you know, and I'll put a link in here after the fact. You can apply for a free strategy call to find out if the Ripple Effect Institute is a place where you want to be on this journey toward creating really big change right now. I will just tell you, nobody in there is giving up. Every single person is fighting in their own community for what they know is right. And even through the despair, when you are surrounded by people who are all committed to doing really amazing work, to not giving up, to finding ways to create safety and survival, to working together, you know, to provide novel forms of resistance, thinking outside the box, doing the work behind the scenes, and also showing up in the streets, it will make you feel better. Like, it truly will make you feel better. Community is the thing that's going to save us and get us through this, right? There's no way out of this that doesn't require us working with other people. Like, none of us can make it through this alone. So I really want folks to get serious about getting in community with people who know that they are committed for the long haul of moving the needle. And yes, Laura's here. Laura's a member of the Ripple Effect Institute. She knows exactly what I'm talking about. Nobody inside there is giving up, and none of you should. Okay. And I know there are going to be hard days, and there are going to be days when we need to take a break. And there are going to be days where we're disgusted and revolted and sad and in despair. And that's all a part of this process. But our survival and moving through this is going to require us to be in community with one another and to honestly be building out networks everywhere that we can of people who are doing the same kind of work. So I strongly urge you to get in community with people who are doing really significant community building, safety, survival, and resistance work right now. And a lot of it's happening offline. Like, you're not going to find these people running around on social media. You need to do it in your own community, or you need to do it in environments like ours, which are safe and protected. I will just remind you all that critical to our mental health is being able to receive the support that we need, in addition to giving support to other folks. All right. So stay grounded in that. Stay careful in the work that you're doing, right? Be mindful of security and safety right now, because it really matters, but don't give up. Like, don't give up. We can't give up. And processing the emotional stuff of this is really important, and it's real. Like, we're entitled to the feelings we're having in response. And simultaneously, like, don't give up. Can't give up. The only way they win is if we quit. And that's been true. It's true today as it was the first time I said it back in 2016. Okay. I am going to drop the link into the chat here right now for a free strategy call about the Ripple Effect Institute. If you are interested in exploring whether or not it might be right for you, that's going into the chat right now. You can fill out the application. And I'll just say to everybody, you know, please stay grounded right now because it really matters quite a bit. All right. Hit the thumbs up. Don't forget to like this broadcast, share it with people, comment in the, not in the chat, comment in the comments if you're watching on the replay. And please remember that we have this great new sister channel here right now that is doing training videos once or twice a week. We have a new one coming on the 4th of July because we're not going to be here for a live broadcast. And you can find that at Ripple Effect Institute on YouTube. I'll also drop a link here once we're off the broadcast. And I will see you all live tomorrow. No broadcasts on Friday, reminder, because it is the 4th of July. All right. Have a good rest of your day, everybody, and I'll see you back here tomorrow. Bye.